Recently, the University of San Diego experienced vandalism that involved an anti Semitic symbol. This coincides with a wave of vandalism that has been attacking the Jewish community in America, specifically sacred spaces. For our project, our group interviewed Rabbi Shine Sherry and Taylor Burks to see how the local community reacted to the vandalism of USD and their views on USD as a sacred space.
Okay. How do you feel desecrations impact communities?
Depending on how sophisticated the religious community is, an act of desecration can anger the community or it can make them feel vulnerable. So if they imagine that their space somehow is intrinsically holy, then a desecration of that space is something like an act against God. And so you might be angry about that and want revenge. That's primitive. On a more sophisticated level, you can understand that whoever is responsible for the desecration is sending a message to that religious community that they are not appreciated. And then that community might feel vulnerable, it might feel intimidated, or it might feel like they need to increase their level of vigilance to let them know, to let other people know who might be desecrating their site that they will not be intimidated.
Okay. Why do you feel these acts of hatred are occurring so frequently, like particularly within what happened at USD with the Nazi symbol and desecration of like Jewish cemeteries, so like along those lines?
Over the last year, there has been an uptick in anti-Semitic activity, and that anti-Semitic activity has manifested in several different ways. I don't think that it is coincidental that some of the forces who have been happy with President Trump's candidacy and his subsequent election are also associated with anti-Semitism and with thuggery. So I don't think that is a coincidence, but I also don't think that we are experiencing any greater incitement. Let me rephrase that. I think that the people who are inclined to express anti-Semitic feelings were given a green light in some ways, but what we haven't seen is people who were not inclined to express anti-Semitic emotions or attitudes. We don't see that uptick in anti-Semitic incidents has gotten any traction. And we don't see that it is creating any kind of a movement or a groundswell. And I think the University of San Diego is a great example of that, where once it became known that there were some swastikas and other activities that happened on campus, the campus community got together and said, no, not here. This is not who we are. This is not what we represent. And I think we're seeing that around the country too. There are likely to always be folks with attitudes not just whose attitudes, but whose actions represent attitudes that are outliers. And they will express those attitudes through ugly and immoral and blasphemous actions. The question is that going to fuel other people's ideas, ideology, or is it going to actually motivate them to stand up and say, we've seen this picture, we know how it ends, so we're going to end this here and now. And that's what I think we're seeing more than an uptick in anti-Semitism. I think we're seeing people standing up for folks who have historically been subject to intimidation and worse.
Do you mind if I just kind of...
Yeah, go for it.
So just what do you, just based off what you were saying, what do you think kind of drives a person who would be, maybe just inclined to do something like that, to actually pass the line of actually, doing an action like, drawing a swastika somewhere, or, what happened with the cemeteries or anything like that? Like, what do you think drives a person past that line from just being someone who would be inclined to do something like that to someone who actually takes action on doing something like that?
So So I think it can be a combination of hormones, drugs, alcohol, insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
But I think some of those pieces are necessary.
Right.
And when you talk about all of those actions, every single one is cowardly by virtue of being done in private,
Right.
where they don't expect to be caught,
Mm-hmm.
where they don't expect to be exposed to the public for the kinds of actions and the attitudes behind those actions that they represent.
Right.
So whether we're talking about graffiti in a bathroom stall,
Mm-hmm.
or going in the dead of the night to a cemetery and knocking over and desecrating the tombstones, right? These are not actions of a person who is so firm in their commitment to an ideology that they're willing to actually be open and express their ideas and then be susceptible to having those ideas challenged publicly.
Right.
These are cowards.
Mm-hmm. So would you say the fact that it's kind of happening in private and like in this extremely, you know, cowardly way, that it's not, you know, as not that it's not worrying, but that it's kind of like less what's the word here? Not as troubling as, like, say if there were a big, you know, movement where it was in public and people, you know, openly doing these things under the, you know, public scope where they, you know, people know who they are, and you're like, yeah, this is me, this is what I think about the Jewish community, where it's just being in private and so secretive, it's just a little less troubling, and maybe some people would make it out.
Much more so. One of the things that characterized the Nazi movement was how open they were about the ideology of anti-Semitism that was a bright vein through their platform. So they were not shy about discussing it. It wasn't what got them elected at the beginning in 1933, but nevertheless, you knew where Hitler stood, and he wrote a book in 1925 called Mein Kampf, My Struggle, and he spelled it out right there. These people, they very well may be more organized than is represented by a cemetery here and a bullet in a synagogue window in the Midwest and a couple of swastikas over here, and we've also had swastikas being painted in Carmel Valley. But I don't see that as anything close to an existential threat.
For sure.
And, you know, I do think that youth plays a significant role, and when we talk about anti-Semitism on college campuses, we're generally talking about young men.
Mm-hmm.
And young men have higher insurance rates for a reason, because their rational mind is not fully developed, and they are oftentimes easily provoked or easily swayed in order to do what they think might impress somebody,
Right.
Into something that is just stupid.
Do you feel comfortable on campus, like given your profession and how you said you're the only like Jewish professor on campus? Do you feel comfortable with the USC?
I'm certainly not the only Jewish professor on campus.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, like teaching it, not like actually.
Professor Gross also teaches,
Okay.
but I may have said something like I'm one of the few professors who I know that's openly identified as a religious Jew, and I am a rabbi, and as far as I know, I'm the only rabbi who is teaching. I feel 100% safe, but Rachel, more than the safety issue, I feel 100% respected.
That's good. Yeah.
I have never, there has never been a moment where I have felt either unappreciated or disrespected on this campus. I feel like I have a fantastic relationship with my colleagues, a fantastic relationship with my students. Even the ones that, you know, might not be getting the grades that they would like to get. And I am so conscious, and I want to emphasize this, I am so conscious of how far the Catholic community has come since the Second Vatican Council, and that they've got a rabbi teaching Jewish studies at a Catholic school, that's the news, right? These anti-Semitic incidents, that's old news, right? And they're, we might be seeing an uptick right now, but that's not where the story's going. The story is going for seeing the ways in which our community can continue to work together on the things that we agree about on the ground in order to make this place, our world, better and more habitable and more loving. And the folks who are engaged in these anti-Semitic activities, they're not on board yet. And we hope that one way or another that they will be on board.
So my grandpa is was an Ashkenazi Jew, so he was in Poland at the time of the Holocaust and stuff, and he fled to the U.S., and that's how we're in the States. But so I'm a quarter Ashkenazi Jew. My mom is half Ashkenazi Jew, and it's honestly come up in the recent years that we've even talked about it. Before we didn't really think we were that Jewish, and then recently we kind of found out we our cousin who goes to Cal Poly, she joined the Jew club there, and is getting super into our Jewish heritage. And so we were all talking about it at dinner, and they're yeah, you guys are actually a quarter Ashkenazi Jew. I'm oh really? I didn't even know that, but that's cool and interesting. So that kind of came up, and so we do identify as that, but it's more of a cultural race type thing versus a religious background. Okay, I would say USD in some ways it is because it has religious significance, because of the Immaculata, and there's I don't know if it was originally a church, but if it started as a church, then that could have sacred meaning to some people who are in that religion. But the campus as a whole, I would not say is a sacred space. I would say the Immaculata is, and other certain buildings there's probably that have some kind of religious meaning other than that on campus that are a sacred place to some people, but I wouldn't call USD as a whole one. Especially not in the bathroom where the vandalism occurred. I don't think it was a hate crime, but regardless of that, I still think it's offensive to Jewish people, and somebody who is deeply rooted in their faith could be offended by that, and there's no reason to do it. So I wasn't personally offended, because I know it was just a stupid kid, and I don't it doesn't affect me like that, but it's still offensive. It wasn't I obviously it was bad, so